I was going to say, Chip, the other thing that probably the easiest thing is just turn on a Zoom
Yeah.
for your presentation.
I do that with my video person in the Philippines. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and someone says Benjamin's pretty good with video editing. Now you got someone on your team that can help you do this.
Well, Ben doesn't know yet.
Star.
Well, that's why we hired him to be our movie man.
Good deal. All right, so we're recording. Welcome everybody. We got a good crowd today, 57 strong. Chip, question on the Fortify side. Anything that has come up since last week? Anything you want to talk about, or Leron, or any of the team?
Well, we went over the enhancements that we're planning for Fortify, I think in pretty minute detail last week. So there really isn't anything. A couple of those things have already trickled in. I don't think we really need to review them because they're not the major enhancements yet that are coming in terms of the UI piece. I think the biggest suggestion, I'll just reiterate this for anyone who wasn't on last week's call. The biggest suggestion that we're pursuing that had the most vocal support of this group and from the partner group at large is implementing CIS explanations directly into Fortify and building a report in our report section that allows you to specifically pull out a CIS compliance report on the Microsoft hardening principles that are recommended by CSS for 365. So those are at the top of the list of things that are being pursued for the next release in Fortify. It's still gonna be a few weeks before that stuff drops in because there's actually a lot of work to do there. But, we have all the actions available, and we're gonna make that tangible for you, so you can just hand it to a customer and say, "Hey, all this stuff has been implemented, and here's the CIS control that it maps to."
Is there, Eric, I asked that about compliance manager. I'm assuming you mean Kaseya's compliance manager.
I'm not sure.
I don't care what compliance manager, right? There's several of them, but that would the biggest lift is going through the compliance managers and providing assets and doing the checklists. And if we could export any type of that detail directly into a compliance manager, say rapid fires tools or whatever other ones are out there, that would save us an enormous amount of time.
We'll certainly have the ability to export it as a CSV, Eric, early on, and to the extent that you can import that into those tools, which I believe you can. It's a much longer path to integrate directly to them and actually connect them to the product. So it's something we could consider if we could get a consensus on, which tool has the most value. But every time we do an integration, obviously we're eating a chunk of development hours that is being taken away from something else. So we'd have to consider that one in terms of direct integration.
I think just having artifacts to generate and produce and to help give us policy elements or to bring those together so we can create a comprehensive policy document would be very helpful. And having this for the cloud side is definitely a plus in making a more complete policy document for a customer.
Yep, we agree.
Anyone have any questions thus far on Fortify? Anything you want to bring up to Chip or the team? Or, we've been focusing a lot on Fortify, obviously, with the release. Are there any other areas of SaaS alerts that you guys want to talk about that may not be Fortify related?
Yeah, there are actually a couple of things that we want to bring before this group. You guys have kind of become our, the first place where we float a balloon if we're thinking about making a change or adding something. So Leron and I discussed a couple of things over the past week that we want to implement. All of it's based upon partner feedback. So Leron, if you want to jump into those few things, we can navigate through a discussion and get some opinions here. I think I know what they're going to be, but I'd still like to entertain them.
Sure. So based on the feedback that partners have given us on this call and via support tickets, one of the biggest pain points that we've identified is people feel like the default event trigger, which we have, that is currently 10 files downloaded today or deleted, that when somebody does that, then that's going to trigger an alert. So we want to globally, across all of our partners, change that to 25. And we plan to eventually make this customizable so that you guys can pick what that global number is at the partner level. But for now, in order to, as quickly as possible, alleviate some of these issues of this additional noise, we want to make that go to 25, higher than 25. Okay. So let's open up the floor for a discussion and see what you guys think on this.
Maybe we need a poll question here, Michelle. If you can whip one up really fast, should we be setting this? I don't know how long it takes you to do that. Sorry if I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's okay. Let me see if I can do it while we're in here.
May I just say, why not allow us to set it at the customer or client level?
You can. You already can do that. It's the default value that is causing problems, mostly for new partners.
Okay, so
they want to be able to at a different global default. They don't want to have with it.
Totally hear you, Chip. So there's really 3 levels here. One is the customer, one would be at the partner, and one would be maybe at SaaS Alerts globally. And I'm suggesting that I might want to have a default of, let's say, 25 at the partner level, but I have a specific customer requirement at a 5 or a 10. And I want to be able to say these conditions override. And if it's a new if it's not defined at the partner level, then have your default be whatever that is for SaaS Alerts as a whole. That would be my recommendation.
Discussing, right? Because you can already do this at a granular level down to the individual account. But the global that is automatic when a tenant is first created, a new organization is created, right now is set to 10. And the feedback that we're getting is that's just too low. Like you guys could raise that to some other number and it would reduce the amount of change that partners have to address for every organization.
So if a partner goes in and places a value, it can override the default. For example, let's say I put in a value of 50.
Already.
All right. So why is this not a training thing?
It's such a widespread complaint that that this is one of the things that makes the system so noisy that we think we want to handle it by actually changing it. The knowledge that we've gained is that the base value of 10 is just too low.
Okay.
So what we're trying to get feedback on is, and we got some of it from Eric and from Chad, Eric says higher, Chad says that's a good place to start. I'm not seeing what everybody else is.
One more thought on this, and that is, how about educating in the alert the partner that says, if the default value is being used, this can be customized by going here. And then they can know that this noise is a result of them not doing their due diligence, potentially.
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of our onboarding checklist, Andy.
I'm saying in the alert ticket itself, when you display it, add a little thing that if that hasn't been set, so they know that there's something they can do to remediate this as well. I think this is partly an education and training process, especially.
It definitely is, but we're trying to make a change that can have an impact very quickly, while we're working on creating this as a variable for the partner to set on their own. That task is underway, but will take substantially longer than this.
All right, and by the way, there are lots of people chatting.
I'm working on the poll.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the chat numbers.
So Val is saying, I think having the option to manipulate it from client to client would be helpful. So that is something that you can do at the moment. If you go to the organization screen and you click the pencil icon to edit, you're going to see in the info tab a default file trigger.
Yeah.
Option.
So Eric's comment, Eric V, is exactly why we're addressing this. He says when you're onboarding 200 clients, you have to change it 200 times. And that's exactly why we're looking to modify this. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
I'm going to click 25 for my own just to submit my opinion, but definitely interested in seeing how that comes back. Eric also, Eric Z, it is downloading. It's not syncing. Syncing isn't included. It's downloading, uploading, and deleting. That causes that. So thanks for that question.
Now, is that also qualified as a non-registered device? Right. So say they're on an endpoint that
it can be built into a respond rule that looks at whether or not the device is known, and using the capabilities of Unify inside SaaS Alerts to track the device. So yes, it can track that as well. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to Microsoft. This applies to all of the file products that we track. I know very few of you are Cloud Workspace, Google Workspace users. Not many Salesforce or Dropbox out there, but it does apply to those products as well.
Yeah, you think it'd be best to have two different kind of rules, one if it's a registered device and one if it isn't.
Yep, that you can already do today in Respond. Yes. Oh my gosh. Andy with the multiple account locks. Liron, while we're waiting for the poll results to come in, you want to bring up the next topic?
Sure. So the next one is multiple account locks, as Andy is saying. And right now, I believe it is set to medium. So we want to change it globally to a low, so that when you first get into the system, you might be overloaded with all these multiple account locks. And if we set it to a low out of the box, you're not going to have to go and customize it. If you do feel like it is noisy right now, you can go into customize alert severity and set multiple account locks to low. But what we're saying is, for anyone that hasn't customized it or is a new partner, we would set it to low.
It's almost like you're creating a policy template to set these things, like you're beginning to develop and fortify. That would be helpful at this level as well, so that there could be a clear selection process, that these are the changes that we recommend, and if you're in a regulated environment, these are the things we'd recommend, and that would help map to SIS, right? And just a thought there.
We've definitely thought about doing that, but if you think about that, if you sign a brand new customer and that customer has, let's just say, not good security, you want to know what the situation looks like before you quiet things down, right? You kind of want to establish that initial baseline. So then when we start thinking about it that way, the thing that we've thought about is, okay, well, I think we have to do alert customization. Like, number one, templates, yes, but I want to be able to do this at the customer level, right? Because those customers that have been with me for 10 years that we know are really secure, I ultimately really care about maybe outside approved location for those. But if I have that brand new customer that is maybe like, say, a school or something that's going to be a lot less secure and have a ton of users, I want to know kind of what's happening there, so I can start buttoning things up. And as I button things up, I could start toning things down. And doing the alert severity with templates at the customer level it's going to be a very heavy lift for us to do. It's just going to take a long time to do.
Something to be learned from other people in the security space. I'm thinking of like the threat.
Can't hear you, Andy.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is there something to be said from looking at how others have addressed this type of process? I'm thinking of the silence monitor mode. So you capture all the activity and you can then purge them out, or a threat locker in monitor mode, and then you lock down those pieces. Is there a strategy with templates that might allow us to say, these are the alerts that are coming in, and you can quickly wipe them because you're in monitor mode, and then change a setting, and then let's monitor it again for a period of time. And you begin to tick through this process. In other words, a template, but with a process associated with it for onboarding a customer. It says, these are the best practices to kind of go through.
Yeah. So Andy, we train now through our onboarding process with partners that, when they first come on as a partner, we don't recommend that they set up their PSA, or set it up, but don't necessarily push tickets to it yet.
Yep.
Same thing with email, and do exactly that. it's been a long time since you became a
Gone through
partner.
it. Yeah.
I don't think you're familiar with the way our onboarding process works now, but what we do when we onboard a new SaaS Alerts customer is we bring them in through an onboarding sequence that includes helping them set up for tuning right away, including changing some of the default alert severity settings that we're talking about, and then looking at their data together with them, doing a log analysis, and helping them to understand how they can use those elements. I mean, the deeper movement behind all of this is that the default settings that we have for alert severity today are a legacy of when we first launched the product. I know a lot of you have discovered already that the right way to use SaaS Alerts now is to set all of the defaults to low and then use Respond as the mechanism to customize SaaS Alerts to be, the hyper-tuned product for the way you run your business. So we're working toward templatizing that and adding additional templates in Respond that already pre-package the big things that you're really interested in. Business email compromise, logins from unapproved locations, exfiltration, and naming the rules, if you will, in Respond specifically to follow the kinds of things that we're tracking for. So, for instance, we talked about this from a data exfiltration perspective. Leorana and I were brainstorming this out. Wouldn't it look sensible if we actually created a new event in the underlying architecture of Managed that said data exfiltration? It could be data exfiltration level 1, right? That would be, once we see 1.5 times the value that user or organization is allowed to download, we would trigger a data exfiltration level 1. Level 2 could be 2x that value. Level 3 could be 5x that value. You get the idea. So we start building a way for you guys to quickly use those new events in Respond rules to set up the actions you want to take. Are you following me? Okay. So, Michelle, do we have enough responses on the poll to land on a value?
We had almost 60% response, so that's pretty good. Can you see those results?
Yep, sure do. So it looks like 25 is the right target for now, with 50 as a close second. That's interesting. All right, we'll let everyone know, next week what we ultimately decide upon here. Looking at those results, we might come up with a number like 30 just to split the difference, and move on with that. And I'm going to assume, based upon the chat, that dropping the default severity of multiple account locks to low is sort of universally welcomed. If there's any opposition to that one, throw it in.
And obviously, if you disagree, you can always go back in and set it to whatever you think it should be. Like, that possibility is always going to exist.
Okay, Leron, did we have anything else product-wise to dig into today?
We do. So one of the requests that we've had from partners as well has been to create a SaaS Alerts status page. So we put one together and we wanted to run it by you guys before signing a 12-year deal with these guys. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
So very basic. The URL is going to be different once we've signed on, but very simple, very kind of straightforward status screen. You'll be able to come in here. You can subscribe to updates. You can check the status of Manage, Respond, Reports, Unify. Fortify hasn't been around all that long, so the history is not quite there. Our API, support knowledge base, and corporate website. And if we have any incidents, you will see them listed here. So I just want to...
Are we able to, this will email us in the event that any one of these services drop, or does it have to be totally down?
I think you have to subscribe to the updates.
Okay, and then it gives you no matter what.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Leron was being facetious, Mike.
But what, the 12-year deal?
Yeah.
But it's a great deal. Okay, I can't see the chat, so if,
I think there's kind of universal support for this, and which we knew there would be, but what we're really looking for here is based upon your experience with other status pages that in products that you use. Is there anything we're missing? Sometimes when we're designing something, our main thought is to make it as simple as possible and accessible. But if there's something significant that should be here that's not, we love that feedback from you guys.
May I ask if you could include this with an API back to the Autotask or ConnectWise that says, hey, look, there's an alert here if they're not subscribed. In other words, this could easily be someone moves off, but if you could also send us a ticket saying, hey, look, we have a challenge, this is what's happened. And that way it gets to the service desk, whether or not they're subscribed.
it's a very interesting request. We could do that, right? We could consume this RSS and create internal SaaS Alerts tickets that would then feed your system. But that would have to be obviously some additional development on top of this in order to make that happen. But it is definitely possible.
I'm just thinking, how do you alert the people actually working with this, saying, hey, we got a problem, right? And if this is not only going to people on the call, they may not be the people working the tickets or working with it.
It's a good idea, Andy. It's not going to slow us down from implementing this as is, but it's one we can
Good.
Move forward.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Andrew, back to you.
All right, Shep. Great stuff. By the way, while you guys were going through that, Shep, I was communicating with Phyllis Lee at CIS, and she said that not only would she, but the person that wrote the benchmark, the best practice, if you will, for 365, will get on a call with you.
Excellent.
Yep.
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, so I asked her for some times and she'll let us know.
That's great.
Maybe what would be interesting, Chip, is how you guys have done the Cool Rules Challenge. Maybe it's whoever comes up with the best hardening, as an MSP for M365. What are your thoughts on that?
One more time.
So you guys have done Cool Rule Challenges, right?
Yep.
What if, you put out a challenge for who can create the best hardening, for an MSP when it comes to 365?
Are you talking about for the client or for the MSP itself?
For the client or for the MSP? Your standard.
Right.
I mean, it could be either. Hopefully you have a best practice that, you can manage across the board. Do you see why? Give me a sense of why you would do yours differently.
I'm going to say that I have to be more secure than potentially a customer does, because I have access to all these systems and the information that it's there. And for example, if they got in, how am I protecting my IT glue or, whatever the RMM is, having all that covered, because these are things that SaaS Alerts touches.
Right. I'm just suggesting M3, the
all right,
4 to 5 piece.
I
So
think
you guys we've got a fork in logic, and they are both inspirational to me. The first is Andrew Morgan. I think what you're suggesting is, we're going to make it very easy for people to adopt the CIS benchmarks for hardening 365 and be able to report on it for their customers. But there's an exception in there. I was on a call twice today with MSPs who needed further explanation on when they choose to ignore a policy recommendation in Fortify because they have applied a third-party product and they're not going to use Microsoft's. Let's just say spam or phishing. It would be interesting in some sort of rules challenge, as you call it, like a rules challenge, the Fortify challenge, to look at how partners diverge from the CIS and or Microsoft policy recommendations and what other products they use. I mean, I think that's really interesting information to share in here. So that's the first piece of it.
Before you go to second, so how about we have the best practice for compensating controls?
Yes.
That would be one prize that Michelle and team could create. There'd be a contest. Hey, we're using product X as the compensating control, or we have this enclave because of this, et cetera, et cetera. And we could come up with the best case studies for compensating controls.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I also like Andy Rowe, setting up what do best practices look like for an MSP to harden themselves in all their tools. That is that, we could probably devote multiple days worth of these meetings to discussing that. But coming up with, what looks like a standard around, if you're using, VSA, IT Glue, SaaS Alerts, and, I don't know,
Autotask, or wherever you have customer data, client
exactly.
data.
What does that look like? I think that would be a really, really interesting thing. And, this is the perfect group to actually be a study group around that and compare on that and come up with a recommended standard.
Think how that would change your sales process potentially with prospective MSP customers to say, are you doing these things? Much like Solutions Granted starts with, is everyone doing MFA? If not, don't even talk to me, right? So you could begin to say, most people don't understand that across systems, not just in one area, vulnerabilities can come in. And this is where SaaS Alerts makes a big difference.
Yep. Well, again, it's not just us. It's looking at everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I was on a call this morning with a European who, interestingly enough, one of their main driving forces in product selection for us is that we monitor IT Glue, because they think there's so much risk, and they're a big partner, in the hundreds of thousands of users range, and they use IT Glue to document everything. And obviously, with that many account holders and customers, they have a fairly large tech team. So they view us as a hardening mechanism for IT Glue. That's just one example, but it's not just about SaaS Alerts. It's what you're doing with your whole collection, your whole ecosystem of tools that you're using and how you're managing them. I think that's a really interesting topic.
Well, to that point, is it okay if I share my screen, Chip?
Of course. Hey, why are you asking me? You run this show.
Here's an interesting thing I'm going to pivot off of, and I'll put this in chat for everybody. So in 2019, or actually, it took about 2 years. Every time I see this, I start to laugh, because I ran a CISO peer group at ConnectWise while I was there and running their security strategy, and we were heavily involved with NIST and the NCCOE, and this basically what they do is they build reference architectures, and this was the most heavily downloaded reference architecture in their history, in NCCOE's history. And this is after there was the first basically executive order to protect SMBs. And we got involved with NIST and said, hey, look, if you want to protect SMBs, you need to work with the MSPs, because that's who holds the keys to all your, the SMBs in our country. And they loved the idea. And we met with Ron Ross. If you ever heard of Ron Ross, he's the godfather of NIST 800-171 and et cetera, and 53. And they were just giddy over this. Long story short, NIST decided to not pursue any of these recommendations, and instead their answer was to set up the small business corner website, and that was our government's answer to protecting SMBs. So sorry, I digress as I laugh through this, but we spent inordinate amount of time coming up with ways, and again, this is probably a little dated based on where we now have our platforms and things like that, but this was published in 2019. Would this be helpful for you guys to see as
Yes.
you guys think about protecting your own stuff?
Please set it in the chat.
Are you all shocked that NIST punted on working with MSPs? No, yes. All right. All right. So next thing I just want to put out there, and then we'll get into today's topic is Michelle, can you just see show of hands? Who's attending IT Nation Connect? Anybody? Michelle?
No one so far.
No one's attending?
I don't see anything.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Well, I don't have to go into that. SaaS Alerts is involved with this with us, along with the other sponsors, top sponsors of Write a Boom. So if you are going or know somebody that is going to IT Nation, you certainly can let me know. We have a limited number of people that can participate in this. All right. So then let's go on to our main topic here. Can you see my keynote?
Yes.
We can.
All right. Awesome. Oh, Chip, before I do this, do you have anything you want to chat about in the let me just jump real quick here. The overall findings from Microsoft. Like I said, the one thing that I found so ironic is, and tell me if I read this correctly. So Microsoft, boasts about how, right, you should use their suite of tools for collaboration, conferencing, et cetera, et cetera. Fair? You should use their suite of M365. And yet, if you read how they have their production environments, everything is completely isolated. And so, Chip, did I read that correctly?
Yeah, you did read it correctly. I mean, it literally is almost one step below air gapped. So it is completely isolated from their corporate network, and no one's allowed to use. I mean, you can't even take a mobile phone in the room, sort of thing. So you did read that correctly. I don't know if everyone's has to see this. This came out yesterday. Microsoft's follow-up on the Storm 0558 incident back April through June. I guess my initial first comment is I'm impressed with the level of transparency here. More so than we have seen from Microsoft in the past. This is a pretty good mea culpa of how the keys got stolen, even to the point where they acknowledged that they had a core dump and a system crash, which is what caused these key systems to be exported out of the production environment, which is supposed to be isolated, put in an area where engineers, I don't know how Microsoft isolates their different engineering teams, but put it in an environment where an engineering team had access to it, and subsequently having an engineer's account hacked, which in and of itself is kind of an amazing statement for Microsoft to even acknowledge. And the hacker then rummaging through what he could get access to, lo and behold, discovers this key that can be used to create authorization tokens. And then the second mistake we already knew about, which was that key was capable of creating auth tokens for the enterprise side, not just the consumer side. And then they go on to discuss, again, much to my pleasure and also surprise, why they had made the decision years prior to allow for that to happen, because there was so much demand for account crossover between consumer and enterprise. Basically, people, were yelling at Microsoft and saying, look, I want to use my corporate logon to play Halo. Okay, well, if that's what you want to do, then I guess we're going to make that possible. So it was just an impressive, to me, it was an impressive piece of transparency on Microsoft's behalf. And I think it's an example for the entire security community to follow, to make sure, look, you gotta bear you got to open the kimono, so to speak, and let people know what really went on. And in that case, that's the way you build trust. So I was impressed by it.
Chip, I'm just gonna. I see Andy's got his hand. Again, sorry. Am I wrong to call foul here, though? Like Microsoft themselves are saying they don't have they don't hold logs for an extended period of time. Like, kind of.
So I interpret it this way. We actually don't know when, in this fairly broad time period, that this engineer was hacked, how long the attacker was there, and what all they took. We
Right.
only know that some engineer got cracked because that's the only way this could have possibly happened. And we can't even forensically go back and dig it out ourselves. But I mean, we all know that Microsoft doesn't hold on to the logs forever. And I have some sympathy for that. You guys can imagine the amount of data that we are logging on a daily basis, and what it takes for us to manage that in a cost-effective manner so that we can hold on to event data for you for a full year. We were willing to do something that Microsoft itself maybe isn't, because their development focus isn't on the same things that ours is. I think we've shared with you guys in the past that for every event that we create in Microsoft, there are dozens to hundreds of pieces of raw data that we get from Microsoft that contribute to the creation of that event, but never get saved. Remember, we don't save your customer data as it comes out of Microsoft. We curate that into an event that makes tangible sense to the MSP and its partners. So the amount of data that we're maintaining for you guys is a fraction of what we have to process and then discard that comes from Microsoft. In their case, if they were going to save everything, they'd be piling up terabytes, if not exabytes of data per day. So who's going to pay for that and continue to make the products affordable? So yes, Andy, you're right to call foul. But again, I find it also surprising that they just acknowledge it straight up front.
Last thing I'll say is it also speaks to, did they have a breakdown, in some type of process in their detective controls? Like, yes, we were collecting logs, but the next question is behaviorally, why wasn't something triggered?
Yeah. Well, you remember my initial comment on this when this first happened, and my theory out of the gate was that this was likely an inside job.
I see what you're saying.
So there's nothing in this statement, actually, to me, that completely disproves that theory. Like, we really will never know. Microsoft is saying that an account was hacked. We actually don't ever know. And their acknowledgement that they can't really tell when the account was hacked and for how long and what happened, it really actually means that they don't even know. So that's the way I read between the lines.
Got it. Andy.
2 questions come out of this, Michelle. This is targeted at marketing. One, how can this incident tied with identification, authentication, tied to the customer's responsibility with Microsoft, how could this be used to educate partners? 2, the second communication or marketing piece is, how could we use this as an example of how SaaS Alerts makes a difference for cloud customers, and how we're beginning to deal with these issues that even Microsoft is having to wrestle with. I think there are 2 key takeaways here that would be great. 1, educating partners on how to better use SaaS Alerts, and 2, how and that's the key leaping, I guess, is how do you call this piece, right? And secondly, at least that was I'm connecting it that way with this particular piece. And then how we could use this to communicate to our prospects and customers why we continue to evolve SaaS Alerts.
They're great rhetorical questions, Andy. But can we hold that thought as we go through a little bit today?
Absolutely.
Time, because I think at some point here in this, sorry to interrupt. Chip, did I interrupt you?
No, I just made your point, Andy. If those are rhetorical questions that Andy is asking Michelle to consider, I think, not answer to.
Yeah. Okay. Come on, Michelle.
I'm considering them.
I thought you'd just pull out your guitar and kind of riff on those answers.
Soon
All
enough.
right. All right. So at the end of last session, I kind of gave a preview to something that, like, this isn't, new per se in terms of using proxy servers in a malicious way. The newness is the proliferation of this recently for obfuscation of IP addresses. So are you guys familiar? Have you read some of this stuff? Have you heard about this recently? Anybody? And again, Michelle, if you can be my eyes. No. Okay. All right. So let me, Andy, think about, what you wanted to do. And I think this is important for everybody. I want to take a look at these 10 slides or so as if you were setting the stage for a conversation with a business owner. Okay. Now, keep in mind, I'm not suggesting you would run through a PowerPoint in that conversation. So is that clear with everybody? I'm setting the stage here of the components out there that we need to consider to get people to change perspective on how this is going to impact their business, because again, they don't speak our language. That's the most important thing to keep in mind. They speak a completely separate language from technical and security. They only speak business. Okay. The majority. You might get some CFO, CEO that understands this. Okay. So let's take a step back. So we know that from the latest Verizon data breach investigative report, when they did what's that? Oh. When we look at this study, right, of 16,000 plus incidences, the majority of attacks were web app. Translated in our world, M365. Okay. 85% of them were server-based. Translated in our world, think, the online version of Exchange, I'm air quoting, SharePoint, makes sense, wherever the keys to the kingdom, wherever the most critical data lives, fair for exfiltration. We know that initial access, stolen credentials, were the #1 way in which a threat actor got into an environment. Okay. And then obviously there were certain variants of what they would do, whether it was, spear phishing, which was a big one, to business email compromise, and or ransomware. So far making sense to everybody? The other thing we want to kind of always, right now to also to talk about with our customers is, for the first time ever in this report in 13 or 14 years, there's no difference between the first time ever in the report that there was no difference between enterprise and small business. So historically, when Verizon published the reports, because of the difference in applications and how solutions were used in our businesses, enterprise and small business had a very big discrepancy. Today, since COVID, because of remote work, because of the shift to the cloud, there is literally no statistically significant difference in the attack patterns from SMB to enterprise. So again, the theory of I'm different, threat actors don't care. You're all the same to them. Okay, so let's look at what these malicious proxy servers, this proliferation of them recently. The most recent one was caught by Alien Labs, formerly Alien Vault, which is now part of AT&T. They have a pretty big threat team. They caught in pretty much back-to-back weeks. The first week was around Mac OS. There was a proxy through a malicious code called AdNode, which was serving up ads, and it was dropping command and control through those ads and using that information, as a proxy. The other one, and again, I can put this momentarily in chat, was they found that this Windows botnet proxy server got very quickly proliferated over 400,000 Windows devices. So if you think about these things multiplying, and basically what these proxies do, however they get started, this is a simplistic, by the way, version of what's happening, is that obviously there's an initial compromise, again, typically through credentials, whether those are through phishing, whether those credentials are bought, etc. There's an account takeover. There is some type of payload delivered. In this case, this most recent one, they delivered command and control. They delivered, in this malware, they delivered command and control. The big thing they were delivering was proxy, this proxy server, though, so that then they could resell these localized IP addresses so that the threat actors could now attack, but there could be no attribution. Does that make sense? So geolocation and things of that nature are rendered useless. And the other thing that was really interesting about this is their payload was digitally signed. And in this case, again, this is, I kind of question this a little bit, but they said no EDR picked this up, which is interesting because, you know, when you start to see behavioral anomalies for an EDR to not pick up anything, I don't know. So far, any questions so far on what's happening here and kind of the backdrop? Obviously, I'm gonna put this URL in here, and is this making sense to everybody? I'm assuming that no
May
response.
I get the PowerPoint? This is
Yeah,
really helpful.
Yeah, I'll send it to Michelle. Okay, so the next thing is, this is where you're setting the stage for your customer and go, okay, so in the customer's like, okay, and you're saying, you know, I'll role play with Eric. Eric's my prospect. Eric's like, and Eric, you're saying, so what? And I agree with you, Eric, so what? Okay, so they steal they steal credentials, they sell credentials, they get in, and let's just look at who they target. Well, by and large, they target the C-level in organizations. Well, why is that? Right? Well, the C-level have the most access typically in an organization, and the C-level have the most typical information on supply chain, on employee data, et cetera, right? And ironically, I'm joking around, right? Who within that C staff did they target most, which was CFOs. So then we go to, okay, how do we make this easy for the prospect or end customer to understand? Again, so you're sitting there saying, you're still talking something, you know, that's Greek to me. Help me understand this. And I'll say, okay, gotcha. Let me break it down. So someone sells your login and password. They get into your account. They're able to put down what's called, you know, these pieces of code so that they can keep constant communication in your network, no matter what. You can't tell where they're at because of these ways in which they hide themselves through these proxies. And then they move through your network, right? Elevating their privileges to get to your server that you told me represents 80 to 90% of your revenue. Not only does that server contain 80 to 90% of your revenue, but when they initially got in and spearfished into your account, I'll enlarge this so you guys can see this. This is typically what a threat actor likes to find in your mailbox. And this is what you typically find. This is actual data that I actually had pulled through one of my partners. If you ever heard of Netrix, they do data discovery, data classification, and they scan everything from O365, SharePoint, all of the most critical sensitive data repositories in an organization. So this is a typical Office 365 account and what they'll find when they scan it. Right. So this could be when you talk to your customer. Remember how you're telling me you have your clients' invoices. Remember how you told me you have, your employees' data. You remember how you have, this is what they're after, and this is what they're going to sell. And this is how they're going to start going after your clients and ruin your reputation. Okay. And how do we know that? Again, let's go to the actual data, because they can actually, this is what typically within a mail account, where you'll actually see the shares, you'll actually see the actual raw data. These are things like, again, invoices or in this instance here, let me go into this next one for you. I think it's here. Bear with me. This one here. Again, when you look at the metadata of what they're scanning for, credit cards, and so think of anything that digitally could impact that business in their supply chain, in their customers, in their most mission critical servers. This is what the threat actor is seeing. Let me just take a pause there. Is that making sense? Good.
Thumbs up.
Awesome. So I'm going to pause there. That's really it, Andy. And yes, I'll share this. I'll send this over to Michelle. But does that resonate with you guys in terms of how we have to, I took my time, but how we have to take all these things that we talk about from a threat perspective, what the threat actor is doing, but eventually, or I shouldn't say eventually, quickly turn it into business speak about their critical servers, their critical systems, their critical processes, what the threat actor will do with that information that, again, they don't think a threat actor wants. So,
anyone?
I think this is great. You helped me translate this into a story that could be resonated real clearly to any prospect, and it's really, I'm grateful, Andrew. You add value.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Pleasure, Chip. Like I said, that's what I want everybody to think about when they're having conversations, to be honest, is like, could my grandmother understand this? Right? Because think about the business owners you're talking to. Like, we get excited, we are passionate, and on a call like this, like, we all get what we're talking about, right? We're speaking a foreign language to them, but we have to make sure it's actually, from a business risk perspective, something that's going to move them.
Andrew, if you'll allow me, I just want to tie this back to, I think, an ongoing conversation that we have on the weekly SASE calls, not every time, but we talk a lot about the value of IP geolocation data. Or sometimes we talk about it more in the context of lack of value. And this drives home that point for me. We've seen, and our partners have shared a lot of this with us, that the consistent pattern of the BEC, the successful BEC, that SaaS Alerts captures that event before there's a loss, but nevertheless, the account gets compromised, is the initial activity often starts from a foreign country. Something that is an unapproved location, and that's one of the things that helps us find it. But it's the underlying account behavior after the fact that really alerts us to the fact that a BEC is underway. And it's because of these proxy networks that we have to stay so vigilant about the rest of the account behavior. That's what we're really monitoring, because the smart guys that are actually getting in and using those credentials, living off the land, taking their time, studying who the vendors are, who the clients are, who the key people in the organization by reading emails, they're smart enough to use a proxy network or VPN, one or the other, to mask where they're coming from. And the fact that these proxy networks are so effective at telling you, offering you, hey, do you want to come from, Urbana, Illinois, and not Chicago? Yeah, we can do that. We can give you that. Do you want to come from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania instead of Philadelphia? Yep, we can make it look like that. And that's unbelievably powerful for the guys that we're all fighting against. And this is a great explanation of that problem, and why it's so necessary to continue the study of user behavior analysis.
Chip, you kind of at 1:59 with less than a minute left, you actually nailed the point. So this is it. You're looking here at services, just like we offer services. This is a highly effective supply chain in the criminal network. So when you look at what Black, what is it called again? Black, hold on, I'll let you guys go. Black proxies. So this is a service. So if you're a threat actor, their packaging and pricing is fantastic. Take a look. They tell you they're blazing fast. They can rotate. They only use residential. So they basically can help you as a threat actor, as Chip was just saying, obfuscate and for very reasonable price. No one will know where you're coming from. And as Chip said, wherever you want to be coming from, we can help you. And which gets into the, like you're saying, Chip, we really got to get into the whole behavioral detection area, which is the other pieces that SaaS Alerts is helping with post compromise, the initial access. So, Andy, did you have a closing thought there?
I just had a thought here, and that is to take this and say, how could we write a respond that would help reduce this risk, and say, this is what AT&T found, or Alien Vault. This is how it was affecting itself. Impossible travel would be one example. It doesn't necessarily have to be geolocated outside the US. And say, these are triggers that include us in or help reduce this overall risk to you. And that I was thinking this might be something right up Ben's alley, is to take this example and say, by the way, here's a respond rule that might help.
I think that's a great closing point.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to seeing everybody there next Thursday. Thank you for all staying on so long. And Chip, great seeing you, Michelle, and everybody. Have a fantastic week.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you,
everyone.
Amber. Bye, guys.